Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Let me just swing this over here for a second. How you been? So, been a crazy world. It seems like every day it gets crazier. Suppression is out of control. You can tell when the video gets shared that people are seeing it. And it was like I almost got things back to normal and they were just going to help me out. And now I feel like I'm a little bit back under their suppression again. So if you could like and share and subscribe, and just also so you know, like this video doesn't get monetized until someone at YouTube gets paid to watch it, which is pretty hilarious. But yesterday, someone asked me if they're like, you should get a Patreon or something. Well, I have a Patreon. And like, you should get a website. Well, I have a website. So just to remind everybody, I have a Patreon. It has exclusive content. It has all the fix-ins. I recently redid it so you can pay annually, and you can basically get in at $1 and just walk around. But also, you could become a chronicler of Tartary. By the way, several people did that recently. And I just wanted to say that's really awesome of you. This helps like more than you know. I mean, maybe you do know. But yeah, it's a huge deal. Like the fact that you're paying for content to be made for everybody, you're great. So we love you. I just wanted everyone to know that's based. And I still need help paying for all of this equipment and running everything and buying rice. So the other thing is you can go to on Exertis.com and you can support there and you can avoid the Patreon system. And theoretically, I get slightly more if you go directly to me through my website. So I like this as well, the give forms thing. And I have similarly things you can do individually or reoccurring. There's even a special other so that's give forms. Here's donor box. I'm trying them all. So if you go to the donor box thing, it has monthly plans, the same as Patreon, and I don't get charged almost anything. And there's some good things about donor box, so I don't have to worry because Patreon could also shut me down at some point. And again, I keep my content elsewhere just to be safe. But the other thing is, of course, if you don't even care about supporting unless you buy a t-shirt or something, you want to get something out of supporting physical or something, well, you can do that. You can go to the Andreas Exertis Teespring and you can buy, fanny packs and leggings for your girlfriend or yourself. And you can even get, you go to the andreas.me/store for special prices. And that's like a low key thing because this is another store that has other shirts. It's not even on a button yet. I might put on a button. I mean, I ought to, but I kind of like how weird it is that I don't have a button. You know what I mean? It's kind of like I'm hiding that store or something. Maybe I need to have a secret store. Okay, so one thing I wanted to also do is a little bit of news. I'm a little scared to do news today. I mean, yesterday, by the way, guys, chat has to be careful. Like, if I'm figuring out, like, everything I'm doing right, and I'm like, what's going on? Why am I getting strikes? And then I look back at my chat, and I see that the chat's been, like, a little wild, and forgetting that this is not free speech, but this is just some didactic, despotic platform that we're supposed to, we have to be very careful. And I'm trying to be careful, so please, guys, be more careful on the chat. I know yesterday there was a shooting. I actually talked to somebody who is allegedly according to, all mainstream sources, one of the people who stopped the shooter, and so I kind of wanted to interview them. I don't know if that'll really happen. It's like a 50-50, really. But it's interesting. I think that we always look at everything, and it's like, granted, the timing and synchron, I get it. But just guys, all right? Let's talk about something in the news that kind of does matter, even though it disgusts me. Let me see here. It's the story of Hillary Clinton gate. All right, Clinton campaign counsel testified he didn't trust FBI as Sussman defense floats mistrial motion. Okay, so this is the biggest deal right now. I don't think it's maybe not everybody cares. This is the thing that I think in the media, I mean, granted, I'm surrounded with specific kinds of people, but this is the kind of thing that really seems like the most important thing. Sussman was a lawyer for Hillary Clinton, represented the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016, cybersecurity lawyer, charged with lying to the FBI, and they've said that he was working for the Trump administration. Basically, he said, I was working for Hillary Clinton, I was working for the campaign, but then I went above and beyond my duties and got involved with the Trump administration and framed them with data that was really about the Clintons. But no, I'm sorry. That's not what he's saying. That's just a fact. But what he's saying is this data that was him working at the Clintons, all the Clinton stuff, that really it belonged to Trump. and then it's been proven that's false. All that's not true. And the FBI has even said, and for whatever reason in this economy and world with these Obama judges and everything, he's still not in jail for this. And he's saying, he's moving for a mistrial. So this is the biggest Russiagate thing. And it's interesting because it's happening right now when we're dealing with Russia and we're talking about Russia all the time in Ukraine. That's something that people should really look into more. This is probably the biggest scandal that I've seen in the last 4 years, right? I mean, it depends on how you look at that, but it's big. It's part of them. Okay, so, and then, our hearts go out to innocent people who were murdered. If anybody thinks that, that the acts of crises in the world are not performed by evil people that are willing to sacrifice people, I think they're missing the point of evil, so it sucks for the middle guy who gets hit in the middle of this. I don't know. We worry about our opinions of things later. Don't get sued for libel. Families mourn following elementary school tragedy in Texas. This is going to be the news for a long time, so I'll let you guys mourn. First day out of Shanghai lockdowns was far from freedom. They've got tags, they've got drones, all their stores are shut down. They're preparing for the war right now in Taiwan, and it's going to be crazy because a lot of the Chinese citizens are just like, what is going on? And it's not really inspiring them, and the deal is Xi Jinping is old and he wants one last hurrah as much as Putin does, so war is coming. Russia's shrinking war. Everyone's like, hey, Russia's not even fighting anymore. Where were they over there? And it's like, well, Russia's done what they said they were going to do. They've secured the Donetsk and Mariupol. They're reopening schools. And, their job wasn't to take Kyiv, really, if they didn't have to. It was mainly, if they could just allow Ukraine to exist, then it makes them not look like psychopaths, and they want Ukrainians and them to grow up together and be friends again. And who knows if that'll ever happen now? It'll at least take a generation. But that's the thing. They've done what they said they came to do. Putin fast tracks Russian citizenship for residents of Ukrainian area under Russian control. So all of a sudden, everyone who's living in these areas are now Russians, and a lot of them were already Russians, so it's not that big of a deal. But they had Ukrainian citizenship, so now they've had to give them new solutions. Interesting looking at all that water they're jumping over to walk across. Meanwhile, Davos is happening this year. Rather, in Davos, there are the international talks. I want to see if I can get my friend Joff to talk, but he's in Davos. He lives in Davos now, and he's doing technology. But it seems like the basic thing is they're taking oligarchs' homes in Davos, and they're trying to sanction them, but they're mostly just like witch trial, like this is terrible, how dare you kind of thing. And they're meeting in the Russian war criminals' homes to talk about what the Russian war criminals are doing. And these are all these giant finance people talking about these other finance people. So it's kind of interesting. The fight is going on in Davos, and basically at the end of the day, what they're saying, and there's been up to the minute updates going on right now, is that they took over Russia's former party hub, and they're going to continue to take over all the confiscate all the properties they can from Russia, and try to celebrate in the spoils, which is kind of looks like weasels taking over Toad Hall. It's not a good look. Russia doesn't really need Swiss houses. They've got better places to be anyway. Crimea is nicer than Davos. So I don't know. That's going to be a thing. But the dismissed wage price spiral fears, WTO says food crisis could persist. We keep talking about this idea we're going to run out of food. And it's just, buy some grain from Russia. And it's done. That's literally all it is. I also wanted to bring this up. This is completely random unless you know what we're going to talk about today, which I guess the title of the video talks about the Ottomans and gives you a little hint, is the Ancient Order of the Hibernians, which is an Irish Catholic fraternal order that fought to defend Catholicism, and it wasn't just against Protestants. It was just in general anti-Catholics. And you say 1836, but they based their group on an older group, and you start to find out about this thing. And we're like, well, who are these Catholics? What's the conversion rate of Catholicism in Ireland from the Middle Ages? How many of the middle-aged Catholics were really Catholics? And we start looking into some of these saints, and you're like, wait a second, were these guys Jesuits, or were they Manichaeans or something crazy like that? So then it gets into Janissary. I'm going to really quickly explain what a Janissary is because it's going to come into importance in the thing I'm going to read to you guys. a member of the elite infantry units that were formed in the Ottoman Sultan's household troops. Basically, they had a bunch of guys at first volunteering. That wasn't good enough. So then they went and they paid some people, and that was, people died. So then they went and then they just conquered Cossacks, and they took all these kids from Croatia and Albania and Armenia, and they made them into soldiers. They were forbidden to marry until they were 40 or to trade, like at all. They couldn't buy or sell. It wasn't quite a slave. It's a whole other thing. It's a kind of a military conscription caste. I want to go back for a second to the Hibernians. You can almost see here, though, the connection between the Janissaries and the Hibernians. So the way things are designed in terms of the flag, they're trying to explain that they're fighting against the Janissaries, the Ottomans, but really the Janissaries were a lot of groups of Christians, right? A lot of the Ottomans brought in Christians to make them servants and soldiers. So child levy, Albanian, Armenian, Bulgarian, Croat, Greek, Serbs, taken levied subjection to circumcision, conversion to Islam, and incorporated into the Ottoman army. They became the famed for internal cohesion cement by strict discipline and order. Okay, so forcible conversion to Islam up until like 1690s or something like that. And the slaves had to be, unlike typical slaves, they were paid regular salaries, forbidden to marry at the age of 40 or engage in trade. They completely loyal to the Sultan. By the 17th century, due to dramatic increase in the size of the Ottoman standing army corps, initially strict recruitment policy was relaxed, right? And then civilians bought their way into the order to benefit from the improved socioeconomic status it conferred upon them. So consequently, the corps gradually lost its military character, undergoing a process that has been described as civilianization. So this is a group of people from around Europe that were working for Mahmud II. Who's Mahmud II? Well, Mahmud II was... sorry, this is way later. We have to go back to Mahmud I. So, hold on, let me see here. Mehmed I. Mahmud I? I'll take it. Okay, Mahmud I took over the throne from rebellion. I think... Well, this is important, but I think we're going to go back even further. Let's go back even further. Okay. And yeah, by the way, super chats are welcome. Heavily suppressed channel. You know what? Where's this window? So really quickly, founding a building versus raising a building. Well, raise or Erasmus or erase or erod or eradicate, all kind of connected, right? We can look at raise, completely destroy, Vrasen, pull or knock down a building or a town. From earlier Vrasen from the 14th century, etymologically to scratch, slash, scrape, or erase, from the Old French raser to scrape or shave. From medieval Latin, resare, frequentative of Latin redere, past participle rasis, to scrape or shave. So when you look into these, since the word is only found in Italo-Celtic, this gets pretty interesting. That this word might have come from Sanskrit, and what we know about Turkish, that there's this Celtic kind of... There's a dynamic between the Turks and the Celts that go back thousands of years. In Europe, the Celts are all over into Germany, and you see a lot of redhead Germans and everything, and into Austria, which was part of the Ottoman Empire. Okay. Oh yeah, and then we will talk about somebody way later on, like at the end of the Ottoman Empire, from the 12th century into 1935, and this is going to be a really interesting story. And I don't even think his Wikipedia, yeah, they talk about it right here, the Japanese Arabian connection. So we will be getting into all of that. All right, let me just pull up my little pages here, and let me see here. This is which one is this? Is this the same guy that we're just looking at? I'll save him. Okay, Turkish Japan, notwithstanding the Heian period of Ottoman interaction within ancient Japan and with various examples of Japanese interactions across Eurasia and Western Hemisphere into the 19th century, Japan placed a strong emphasis in the early 20th century on Turkic relations, which may have been the chief instigator which directly implicated Japan in World War II. How is that? In 1930s in Western China, a rebellion erupted, and major powers all fought for control. The Chinese wanted to take their former Ottoman and Tartar territories with the Uyghurs in it, and the Soviet Union wanted to expand. Simultaneously, through the 19th and 20th century, the Turks latched on to Turco-Nipponophilia, or Japanese Turkic cultural connections. You know it's a hard word when you make it up yourself, but Nippon is Japan. I'm trying here. Turkic, Nippo-Turgical. How about that? And their relationship soared. If an inversion of Western paranoia about the Yellow Peril, the Young Turks often fantasized about creating an alliance with Japan that would unite the peoples of the East to wage war against the much hated Western nations that dominated the world. A yellow wave that would wash away Europe. European civilization for good. For the Young Turks, the term yellow, which was in fact a derogatory Western term for East Asians, based upon their perceived skin color, stood for the Eastern gold, the innate moral superiority of the Eastern people over the corrupt West. The Ainu people of Japan stood out as clearly different than the Chinese, and many Ainu were thought to be Caucasian, if not Scandinavian, then perhaps Turkish. And here again is Effendi, Abdul Karim Effendi, who is in Japan in this picture. And you'll get to understand why over 1,000 years later, because that's how I do things. Over the centuries, the Turks had wandered across Eurasia, settling in very large numbers in Anatolia after their victories over the Romans at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. And we showed you the Janissaries, but I'll just re-explain a little deeper. From 1380s to 1648, the Janissaries were gathered through the Dissolution method, which was abolished in 1648. This was taking enslaved non-Muslim boys, noticeably Anatolian and Balkan children. Jews were never subject to diversity, nor were children from Turkic families. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, in the early days, all Christians were enrolled indiscriminately. Later, those from what is now Albania, Bosnia, and Bulgaria were preferred. I think we all know Croatians were preferred, right? I think we all know that. But here's the problem with this. We're told, that Europe, that the Muslims were very peaceable. And they don't really tell you about the Turks and their empire conscripting boy soldiers. The Ottomans, it's important to remember, forced people to die in their name for their god, whether or not they wanted to or not. And not just them, they took their children and made them do it. So the Ottoman Empire, let's just remember that about the Ottoman Empire. Having said that, Janissaries, kind of cool. I mean, you can have a little pride in the thing that you were forced to be a part of. And this is why the word slave, comes from Slav, because it really has a lot to do with this period. Janissaries began, though, as an elite corps made up through the Dissolution method of child levy, by which Albanians, Armenians, Bulgarians, Croats, Greeks, and Serbs were taken, levied, subjected to circumcision, and converted to Islam, incorporated the Ottoman army. They became famed for the internal cohesion cemented by strict discipline and order. Unlike typical slaves, we already got all this. Okay. Okay, and now we're going to get into Mehmed II. And I think, is it really this late? I just can't. No, okay, great. It's a different Mehmed II. Because I couldn't imagine it being the 1800s. But then again, that just fits with our flamenco here, and it's going to be fun. So Mehmed II is the Mehmed the Conqueror. And if you really look up his name, after the conquest, Mehmed, let's slow down. Let's just do this right. Okay, September 1446, and then later February 1451 to May 1481. In Mehmed II's first reign, he defeated the crusade led by John Hunyadi after the Hungarian incursions into his country broke the conditions of the Truce of Peace of Szeged. When Mehmed II ascended the throne again in 1451, he strengthened the Ottoman navy and made preparations to attack Constantinople, which he succeeded at. And by the age of 21, right? So at 21, he'd conquered Constantinople, which came with it quite a bit of territory. Now, so much of the empire shifted at that moment because they had been using Constantinople as their capital. And so you see northern west, even into Wien, outposts trying to protect themselves against Ottomans. But the Ottomans at that point completely control Constantinople, and they even control Vienna. I mean, arguably, because Vienna says it's not, and they say they're sieged, and that they make it through it after 50 days. You've been to Vienna? There was nothing going on while the Ottomans were controlling all of Austria. Okay. And by nothing, I mean the Austrians who were doing all the stuff. After the conquest, Mehmed claimed the title of Caesar, here it is, of the Roman Empire. Now, of course, the Catholic Church refused to honor this title, but the Orthodox Church honored his title. So it's one of those examples where the you can't rely on Western history because they're just ignoring things on purpose. They're literally just saying we're not going to tell you what's happening and we're not going to acknowledge what's going on, right? And that doesn't work for everybody. So in the Eastern Orthodox Empire, they go, okay, this guy took over, conquered, saw, won, Veni Vidi Vici. I think that means he's Caesar. And so they allow, I mean, not just that, he says he's Caesar. He quacks like a Caesar. He has feathers like a Caesar. So for all intents and purposes, for everybody except for the liars, Mehmed II was Caesar of Rome. And he continued to be Caesar of Rome up until, the end of his second reign in 1481. So it's a long time, right? That's like 40 years. If you really think about the amount of time he spent. Now there was a bit of there's a moment where his cousin tries to take over the throne and he loses the throne for a minute, but he takes it again. So he's considered a hero in modern-day Turkey and parts of the Muslim world, Istanbul, and you can see a lot of pictures of the guy, and he looks very, Turkish. He's just kind of Caucasian guy, and there's some Asians and some Persians, and you can see that there's a confluence in the Turanian period between them all, and so that kind of played in well with the Turkish beliefs. So 50 days of cannon blast during the siege of Constantinople left him in charge of the Byzantium. And this is another thing to remember, is that we're calling it Rome, but remember, it's really the Byzantium, okay? And there's reasons why we connect and we say, there's two truths. One, why we say that the Byzantium was Rome, and one, why we say that Rome was not the Byzantium, and that Rome basically, as an empire, didn't exist, because there was more of a Byzantium empire, and the Roman period of the empire might have been described as a micro-empire, or maybe as a conquest of a number of other confederations that just it immediately collapsed. So it's difficult to really describe the Roman Empire the way it's been described without acknowledging that the rest of these places were semi-autonomous. And really, the Byzantium was a lot more powerful. And it was in late antiquity, so this is something more complicated. It's like, how much do we believe about early antiquity, or even late antiquity, because it's been rewritten later. So, Byzantium is suggested to be from a Thracian word, and there's a lot of, the idea of the he-goat. So do what you got to do with your pictures of Jesus Christ in the 3rd century and Baphomet to understand, what's going on with the original symbols of their god and their culture that have been erased. But that's important. All right, I'm gonna skip ahead just for a bit before we go too deep into Byzantium. That'll be its own thing. It's funny because I was doing Pharaoh, and then I'm cutting ahead to the 12th century to the 1900s. But it's because of flamenco, and I swear it all lines up, right? I mean, first off, I just showed you Mehmed II, who was Pharaoh. I mean, it was Caesar, right? Caesar of Rome, right? So, and this is, again, official history. You saw that in his actual page. I just want to double check that you saw that to make sure you got the Caesar part. This is not me. This is just regular history. Okay. He was only recognized by the Patriarch of Constantinople, which is an Orthodox church, and yet also the Eastern Church, so the Eastern Roman Empire had to deal with it. All right. Clear? Good. He was kidnapped and raised. People who were kidnapped and raised by Mehmed II include Dracula. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing that people don't talk about, but there's Vlad the Impaler is Voivodi III, right? Voivodi III. And his father, right? His father was in charge of Transylvania before him and was not so much of a murderer, apparently. I don't think he was really like the Impaler kind of guy. No, he's got some interesting pictures with his wife. He's a nice guy, as far as we can tell. We don't know. Anyway, his son and his other son, Rudy, kidnapped. And instead of turned into just regular janissaries, for whatever reason, they were raised in the courts. Now, I don't think they were kidnapped by Mehmed. I think they were kidnapped by Mehmed's father. But that meant that they grew up with Mehmed. So Vlad the Impaler grew up with Muhammad, the Caesar of Rome. And he also grew up with his brother, Rudy. And both of them went different ways on that. I think Rudy became a Ottoman, not quite prince, but like an administrator in the east of Transylvania. And Vlad the Impaler got super anti-Ottoman. Like, he was like, dude, you disconnected me from my father. Granted, I'm hyper-educated. I'm super classy. But, I kill rats for amusement now, and there's all these problems with Vladimir the Impaler. So, Yeah, he got kind of upset. But here's his younger brother, Radu. Oh, there's no pictures of him because he's Radu the Handsome. That's kind of interesting. I kind of want to see if there's any. There we go. Something. Radu the Handsome. Wow, it looks like. Is that really Radu the Handsome? This is Dracula's brother? I don't even want to think about it. This is really? I guess so. That kind of makes sense. Yeah, all right, I'll take it. So that's Vladimir's brother. They were kidnapped and raised with Mehmed II, and that led to the beginning of this kind of argument, but in the Ottoman period during Vlad the Impaler's period, which you have to remember that for 200 years before Vlad the Impaler, they're already kidnapping Janissaries and raising them to be soldiers and expanding territory as far as we know. And again, you have to understand that according to the Fomenko timeline, most of the Ottoman history might be explained away, and most of the history before it might be simultaneous to the Ottoman period. And they're just ignoring it. They're ignoring that Caesar was Muhammad at this period because it's offensive. They don't like to acknowledge this fact. But there's two ways that could go. One is that Vienna was stolen by these Germanic Goths and Celts, or that it was legitimately stolen by the Turks. Now, we know that the Ottomans are told to have burned things and to destroy things, but we also know that they protected a lot of people. They said Jews were to be treated equally, that Christians were eventually to be treated equally, I think, by the 15th, 16th century. And we also know how violent the non-Muslims were, right? And so it's not cut and dry yin-yang of this guy is good, this guy's bad. There's a lot of amazing things that Dracula did. He made his city very cutthroat and Persian, but at the end of the day, everyone followed his absolute law, and there was no robbery, right? There's a story where Vlad the Impaler has a guest come to town, and he has a bunch of gold. He's like, how safe is it in this town? He's like, well, leave your coin purse by the fountain. And he walks away for the whole day, comes back, and he guarantees, the king says, I guarantee that you still have all your gold. And he comes back, and there were 23 coins. All of a sudden, there's 25 coins. And he tells Vlad the Impaler, he's like, what an amazing town. Not only did I get my gold back without any problem, there was more gold. He's like, I'm glad you knew that and said that, because I would have killed you as I would have killed anyone who, robbed in this city, right? So if he had not admitted that he had ended up with more gold and someone snuck it into his purse and he just allowed it to be, then he would have been killed. So the order of Vlad the Impaler was strict, but it was beneficial in the sense that there was no crime. So it depends on how you want to look at it. But I think that it's important that we just understand that also during the Mehmed period, there was a lot of tolerance, so there was more authoritarianism on the non-Ottoman side than we like to admit, and there was more liberal ideology and freedoms and intellectualisms and etc. in the Ottomans than we like to admit, right? I think that's the point I'm trying to make here. Okay. Then let's read through this a little quicker. I kind of said this, but I'll just do it again. Vlad Dracul's son had been held hostage by Murad II, the father of Mehmed. These two boys, Radu and Vlad III, Dracula grew up alongside Mehmed, and each developed starkly different relationships with him. While Radu would choose to stay within the Ottoman Empire and serve as a lifelong friend and ally to Mehmed, Vlad became a persistent opponent who fought against his contemporaries until his final breath. While some claim that his long-standing strife with Voivodi of the much smaller region and military shows a weakness in Mehmed, Voivodi being, of course, Vlad, it instead gives us a profound look at his personality and mindset before ultimately pushing back from his attempts to overpower and defeat Vlad Dracula. Mehmed is recorded to have said that he could not take the land away from a man who does such marvelous things. And such a man who had accomplished this is worthy of greater things. This statement from the Sultan himself displayed not only a level of respect for his adversary, but also confidence in the Ottoman Empire as a whole during his rule. Mehmed was also willing to walk away from a conflict that he saw no near success in, because he was head of essentially two empires, having more or less absorbed the Byzantine Empire. Right, and then we're going to jump to Bayezid, and this guy look at how adorable he is, right? You want to be this guy. Like, he's he's as much of a cream ball as his hat. I just like him. He's like Santa Claus. Why are more pictures of Ottomans not used as Santa? I'm gonna tell my kids this was Santa Claus. All right, okay. Bayezid, 15th century, may have been his reaction to the expulsion. The most interesting thing may have been his reaction to the expulsion of Muslims and Jews from Spain in 1492. Bayezid condemned Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabel for what they did. He's like, that wasn't very nice. Conversions of all of our people. So he sent an Ottoman navy over to safely relocate the banished Muslims and Jews to his own territory, told every leader under his new authority that they were welcome. All of the refugees would be punished by death if they were to treat the Jews any differently than their Muslim counterparts. And this extraordinary act led to an increase of new skills, enhancements, and ideas being brought into the empire, like it or not, which resulted in heightened success for the welcoming sultan. And when we think about this period, it's like, okay, Canada, or something, or America, the melting pot. This is the Ottoman melting pot, the Turkic melting pot, and they absorbed so much information from everywhere, right? And that's kind of the official narrative, is that all of these different things that have been mixed together were mixed together in the Arabic Empire because, those were the things that they were okay to mix together. Okay. And now we're going to jump into how things start to change. And that all happens at the exact same time that things start to change in Scotland and masonry starts to spread. More sciences start to spread to Europe, the way we're told anyway. It's going to be crazy. Okay, Ahmed the First. I'm just scared to just jump into it. You know what I mean? Because it's like, this is a lot to tell people, and you're probably going to be like, really? Okay, Ahmed the First is Alexander the Great. Just calm down. Calm down. Everybody just calm down. It's okay. Just read your flamenco. Just relax. And you know what? Just take a breath. It's okay. So the stories of Alexander the Great parallel entirely the stories of Ahmed the First. He's essentially the same guy. His ending scenario is the same ending scenario. Lacking the proper offspring, his kid was too young in this version is the only thing. And so they basically take over the empire around him. But all of the same stories, all the same conquerings, going into India, going into Africa, taking over Alexandria, instituting his new world religion, which is Allah. But, how you got to get into this whole story. Okay. So, and again, 1590 to 1617. Not a long time. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire from 1603 until his death in 1617. Ahmed's reign is noteworthy for making the first breach into the Ottoman tradition of royal fratricide. Henceforth, Ottoman rulers would no longer systematically execute their brothers upon accession to the throne. Way to be real sophisticated guys here. Like, no longer fratriciding. Trying to change things. So he's also well known for his construction of the Blue Mosque, one of the most famous mosques in Turkey. Okay. This is the guy who comes right after him. I need to jump back for a second. Let me see here. What's his name again? Mustafa. Right, Mustafa. So Mustafa's weird, I'm just going to say, because he's how do you describe Mustafa? The way they described Mustafa was insane. So that's your first thing. And the pictures even make him look like kind of like, what are you doing with one sleeve? I don't even know what I'm looking at here. Your outfit's just too weird. One white sleeve? Just one? I'm not against it. Daring. Mustafa I described as having severe mental abnormalities. Mustafa was influenced by his mother Halim Sultan, who obtained notable direct power in his place. Mustafa was disposed by 14-year-old Osman II, and Osman II took over for a little while. I kind of downplayed this. I might want to, I don't know why I have to tell you guys everything about all the things. Oh, what did I do? No. Came back to some random, what? That's just crazy. Everything just, oh yeah. Okay, Osman II. I just wanted you guys to know a little bit more about Osman II. It's not like the most important period necessarily, but maybe it is, So Osman II, 14-year-old kid who took over, adorable, right? Like, this is your child sultan that you want. And you've heard all of your stories about Akhenaten and King Tut and the idea that they're revising history and they're repeating it, and it even ends up in Turkish. this might be one of the stories it's actually based on, or we might be getting closer to the source of these stories. Granted, you got a Chinese version, a Persian version, a Turkish version, and they all draw them a little differently, but they all have star forts. So yeah, that gives you kind of a, if you wanted to have examples of star forts in Turkey, you'll find tons. I'm gonna get a talk going on with Jacob Bogle soon about star forts and the connection between the Ottomans and the post-Ottoman Italy, post-Ottoman Venetian War period, which I don't even got to the Venetian War yet, so I should calm down. The point is, this guy couldn't really run stuff at 14. He had to have a bunch of people around him, and they took over the empire. Oh, excuse me. They took over the empire from Mustafa's hands because they thought Mustafa was crazy, and he was yelling at people. And I think the main thing was he wasn't really that into Islam. I mean, I could be wrong, but what it looks like is he was a bit more into Manichaeism, or just humanism. And you have to remember, this is the period before huge Sharia law extremism takes over, right? At this point, they have so much power. You remember how he talked about Dracula. Mehmed said, dude, I mean, you can do it if you want. It's chill. That was like the whole way of the empire, because they were so powerful at that time. They're like, do whatever you want. Just get out of our way. And that allowed for this liberal Islamic authoritarianism. They're trying to spread Islam, because they said, hey, wherever Islam is, there's peace and there's order, and people are allowed to do what they want because there's all these different versions of the way they worship. They just have to fall in a certain sort of order and line. Way different than after the Nadi, Kedar, Ali period from Persia, where there's a spread of all of these Janissaries that have been converted to Islam that are violent, right? And so this influx of Janissaries who were soldiers who were taught that Allah is not merciful, right? Those are this is literally how quickly it takes. If you convert a bunch of people and you don't change them and they remain violent, then your majorative is a violent majorative, and it completely annihilates your original religion unless you have written records, and thank God we do, or Allah rather. So here's the point. Cute little Osman was strangled to death. And I want you to see his face while I tell you that, because just to me, I think it's part of the deal. Like, okay, so Osman, cute little Osman, was strangled to death after being taken to a tower after having his throne. He was thrown off his throne, carried off. I think he was grabbed by the ear. He was taken upstairs. He was not quite tortured. I think his brother just strangled him to death, and this began again the era of fratricide, right? Which was literally, again, remember, 20 years earlier, they didn't kill the brothers. And he was like, well, that was a bad idea. I should have killed those guys. That's literally how that went. Okay, now we're into 1622. Now this is 22 years after the Queen of England dies, okay? So we've now moved into King James the Sixth and First of Scotland period. And also, by the by, Charles. So we're now actually to the point, more importantly, near the end of the British Crown. This is nearly Cromwell Lord Protectorate. Started in the 40s, 30s. What is this at? Wiki, bro. 1653. I think that's right. Ruling the British Isles from 1653. Okay, so we're still a generation, to be fair. But just the generation that will take over England and kill the crown and, dispose the crown and replace them with a new crown in another generation. Literally the son Charles II. Charles is now. And so this is right at this time. And all of a sudden, England is becoming very, as Britain, slaves are becoming educated and janissaries from Britain exist. Whether or not people like to understand how to admit it or not, it's clearly happening. We have the genetic evidence to prove it. Although it's, you could say Celts are Celts, but no, English are English. So in the face of growing, and this is also why if you look in Germany and in Italy in places, you'll find English blood in people, and it's literally because the Ottomans took slaves from the British Isles to these places and used them as janissaries. And there's not so much slaves, again, because you got paid, you weren't castrated, and you were a soldier, but it's a trade gig. But this is how this happened. So a lot of it we're saying, and what's the story? Rome, Empire, expands. Caesar, what's he do? He grabs a bunch of kids, he makes them into Janissaries, and they take over. They're Roman conscripted soldiers. Okay, here you go. Here's literally that story. Continuing on into how long? Well, into the 1930s, really, into the 17th century, 18th century at least, through the Ottomans. So very recent migration of all of these genes. But how far back does it go? It goes back to before we admit there is an Ottoman Empire. So we'll get into that, but I just want to continue. In the face of growing tensions between the Janissaries and Sepafi cavalrymen, right? Because now you've got a group of conversos, and you have these cavalrymen who are the Sepafi. Let's look at the Sepafi really quickly. Cavalrymen. Did it again. Sepafi movement. And that was it. Sepafi. What was this? There we go. These are the cavalrymen, and you look at them. They have bronze, crazy. This is very Prussian, really, in so many respects. Their outfits and their medals and their shields. Turkish Sepafi, and they rival with the Janissaries, the elite corps of the Sultans. So a lot of the time when you're talking about pogroms and things, the pogroms are based on the Spahi or the Sepahi. And they ended up even into the 20th century as part of the, French cavalry. So we still have, to an extent, an existence of this group. So what they did was they would, kill people, take over towns, they would do whatever. But they were basically the regular mercenaries. And they usually came from the local areas, right? As opposed to the Janissaries who were brought in. And then eventually they said, hey, these Janissaries, they're taking our jobs. And that was kind of a, that's basically what happened there. Started to fight with each other. And, there was a picture there I should go back to, which is the Battle of Vienna. So when you start to see the Battle of Vienna, it's really interesting because the Sepafis have a real problem in Vienna because they're not from Austria, although there might be some. Most of them are from Byzantine, from Istanbul, from, Selçuk, from all these other places, Ephesus, Turkey. So instead, you've got Janissaries with them. Now, a lot of the Janissaries are from Austria, are from Bohemian or Slavic places, and it's a little bit more complicated because then you've got this whole other thing, which is like, hey, how many of these people are raised in the cities that are actually Janissaries? Okay. Oh no! Did I lose my paper? Did I do that? That's crazy. Oh yeah. I gotta be careful about closing tabs, man. Super chats, welcome. Let me see here. Going back. Loading. Almost there. Okay. Yep, this is about here. So, and then let me make this a little bigger for you guys to read from. What did we do? 150 was that what we liked? We liked that. So, growing tension between Janissaries and Sepafi cavalrymen, as well as a revolt from the Governor General of Erzurum to avoid Osman Mustafa's mother. Ultimately, to avoid Osman, whatever. Mustafa's mom, basically, he's about to lose his throne. Okay, so he's about to lose his throne, and everyone wants to take it away from Mustafa because he's crazy. So his mom even decides, all right, the only thing we can do is just don't hurt him. And so she has him removed from the throne, or she allows for it to happen, but she says don't hurt him. And so they move him to another castle, and her nephew and the 11-year-old son Murad IV ascend the throne. So you have an 11-year-old in 1623. Just at the same time that you see the Masons are starting to remove all the royals in all the royal houses in Europe, and Charles is being removed. So, which is, a little bit later, but still. So 1623, authoritarian Ottoman Empire begins to focus on extremist Sharia law. And that's the beginning, because they're scared. They're like, what do we do? We're losing our control. Their empire is going to start shrinking instead of expanding, right? Begins authoritarianism of Sharia law. And also because the obsession with what is right and wrong, comes into the hands of Murad IV. Sultan Murad IV was a psychopath who was raised by people who told him how to be, hyper vigilant. Don't be like your older brother. You'll lose all of Constantinople. So he banned coffee. He banned alcohol. He just went super hardcore and ruined all the fun of the Ottoman Empire. Particularly, I don't even like coffee or alcohol, but in a lot of other ways, right? In the beginning of the iconoclasm and everything starts to begin under Murad, until he dies of, get this, alcohol poisoning in 1640. So what I'm thinking is someone tricked him into a horrifying opiate and alcohol addiction in his life in order to tell him to tell all of his citizens they shouldn't be doing this stuff, right? And this is how they got rid of a guy. They basically drugged him out his whole life and made him think he was sultan. All the advisors, grand viziers, would give him advice or run the city for him, run the empire for him. So at the Battle of Sultan against the Austrians in 1691, before his death, the Grand Vizier had helped the establish tax reforms and contribute to the improved treatment of Christians under the Ottoman Empire. Having taken the title of Sultan and the responsibility of facing their opponents at the Battle of Sultan Ahmed II was immediately met with the Battle of Vienna. I just want you guys to, again, here's some pictures of how Vienna looked. It still does. I mean, it's where's my Vienna tab? I just had it. Okay. Vienna is more of a circle than a star fort. It's still a star fort, but it's a circle in the sense that you look at Atlantis and a number of these designs, and a lot of them are more circular. And so it's interesting how long, I mean, again, 50 days of cannonballs, and 20 years later, after the last generation, and there are stained glass windows that you can see in Austria that some of them haven't even been destroyed by the war. You know, those jerks. So there's a bunch of these pictures of Ottomans coming down on white men, you know, and the funny thing is he's white too, because he's Turkish. So you start to get in this convoluted thing about what was going on when you had Muslims in Austria, because again, most of Austria, East Austria, was completely, I mean, Österreich means East Empire. So the East, right? The East was essentially this Persian Turanic group. And Turkic especially, and this will upset somebody, I'm sure, because when they look into Turks and Austria and Germany today, they're like, what's going on? Well, historically, it actually makes perfect sense that at some point there was a far more Turkic Austria. In fact, up into the Habsburg, and during the Habsburg, their citizens would have remained Ottoman, arguably. So this battle went on for a long time, and we don't even really understand. Here's your star fort picture. That's a great star fort picture. That could be a T-shirt. I'm saving it. So you got this great battle camps everywhere, hundreds of thousands of people. Look at this. When you go deep in, you can see there's tents in every direction, all around the center of the city. They sieged the whole city, and there's rivers running around it, and they just, look at this. There's volcanoes, or what are we even looking at here with the terracing? But they sieged the whole city for 50 days, just launching cannonballs at it, and somehow, apparently, they lost. That's a complicated issue. I'd like to spend a lot more time on, but I'm going to skip ahead for now, and we're going to do the whole Battle of Vienna as its own video because it's way more complicated than probably anyone realizes. It's maybe more complicated. It's as complicated as a civil war, right? Because it is a civil war between the Ottomans and the Christians in Austria, right? Not everyone's on the Christian side. Not everyone's on the Austro-Hungarian Catholic whatever side. And the Turks allowed you to be on the other, whatever religion you want, Jewish or Christian. And the Christians said you specifically had to be a certain kind of Christian. So there was far more support at a certain, until we get to authoritarian Sharia of the next generation in 1624 and 1644. And that's the end of, then that's when all of a sudden Islam changes and becomes very much the same as Catholicism. That you have to be part of this group or else, right? And things start to change. Simultaneously, 1691 begins the Austrianization of Ottoman territories because they've now fully won their war, and they've noticed that there is a bunch of problems going on in the Austrian court. It could be that they're going through the same thing with having tutors that are keeping their children away from the mothers. So there's no contact with the young, and they're driving them insane. So the same things that are going on all over Arabia and in Europe and in Russia are happening there as well. So major gains of territories by the Austrians and losses to the Ottomans, and gains by the Venetians as well over the next few years. The new Sultan was never able to show complete independence of his command and was heavily reliant on his advisors. Throughout his time dealing with the Holy League and newfound disturbances in the province of Levant after a short and rather mediocre reign. Sultan Ahmed II's death in 1695 at the age of 51 led to Mustafa II, son of Mehmed IV, being perched to around out the 17th century as sultan. As the Great Turkish War continued, Sultan Mustafa II led the empire both to victory and defeat, ending with the signing of the two peace treaties in 1699. So this is the beginning of maybe some amount of Austro-Islam peace. The following summer, the Treaty of Constantinople was signed between the Ottoman Turks and the Russian, confirming Russia's capture of the Azov and ending the 17th century hostilities. So this is another big bummer for the Ottoman Empire and another glory for Russia, a glory for Austria, that they're collapsing. And as time goes on, we just say they've always been Austrian, they've always been Russian. The Azov's never been a Persian run area. Yeah, it has. Okay. So in recently too. It's like not long ago. So 1691, Austro-Islam historian Smail Balitz states that Smail Balitz states that the first ever evidence of Muslims in Austria dates back to nomadic tribes from Asia that entered the region in 895. Following the Ottoman conquest of the Habsburg Empire in the late 15th century, more Muslims moved into the territory that makes up modern-day Austria. Muslims were expelled after the Habsburg Empire took control of the region once again in the late 17th century, but a few were allowed to remain after the signing of the Treaty of Passarwitz in 1718. The Recognition Act in 1874 gave Christians and non-Christian communities, including Muslims, legal framework to be recognized as Religionsgesellschaften, religious societies. The largest number of Muslims came under the Austrian control after the Austro-Hungarian occupation of Bosnia-Herzegovina, near Croatia, in 1878. The land of the Janissaries. See, I love how they don't want... It's funny when they're talking about Croatian, it's like, bruh. They're like, yeah, they preferred other people. Bro, Bosnia-Herzegovina is the land of the Janissaries. The land of the Janissaries. We still got buildings. There's some of them. I mean, that Bosno-Croat-Serbo war, it's kind of been a bummer. A lot of bridges destroyed. I almost want to bring it up, but it's like, come on, let's forgive and forget, right? But Bosnia Herzegovina bridge destroyed, war and rebuilt. So that's kind of the thing. This is the bridge over Mostar. That's right, Mostar. Mostar's beautiful, just like our people. Was it a war crime? Probably. I'd say so. I mean, it's a 1,000-year-old marvel. And they just bombed it, right? I mean, granted, everything is a war crime these days. So what are you going to do? If you take out a bridge, it stops people from using the bridge. I don't know what you want. So it's terrible. I hate it. It's one of my favorite bridges. I walked across the rebuilt bridge, and I was very impressed. And it does show you what Islamic architecture can do. But yeah, super bummer to destroy this bridge that was just... I mean, come on, man. This is this ancient bridge. I don't know. I remember that as a kid being super bummed out that it was destroyed and really excited that they rebuilt it. But at the same time, it's just like, don't destroy bridges, man. What the heck? All right. Get past that. Shed no tears, America. Let's move forward. Wien history tab I could open up for just a second, show you a few pictures, just like, it's the wonder of Wien, which we call Vienna because of the Italians. So the Venetians, and this idea that the Italians, why do we call Wien Vienna? Because we're referencing the Italian version. It's not just a coincidence that Italy controls German territories that speak German today. What we understand now about these regions of Italy that have been conquered by Germany, which were part of, Austria, which were part of the Ottomans, is that these parts of Italy were also part of these Austrians. And so afterwards, during the conquering, the Italians took over those parts of Germany, took over North Germany or South Germany and North Italy, where there's a lot of German speakers, and they still speak German in those regions. There's so many different connections, but also it means that whatever language was spoken before they forced this dead language that was in reverse, mirror backward from Etruscan to be spoken. I'm talking about Latin, because Latin's basically a created anomaly that is similar to Hebrew, is just kind of fabricated, but from existing things, but different, because Hebrew's at least based on a real language, like based on Proto-Semitic and Aramaic. you can't say that about Latin. Latin, we don't know. We just know that it's backwards. Like, it literally, you look at pictures of Etruscan and you can see that someone took the letters and they're speaking backwards. And I get why Satanists in the Dark Ages would try to pray backwards, because they legitimately thought that everything was flipped. So again, here's Wien's star fort with its rather impressive star fort at that. It's not just a fort, it's a star community. And I think this is something that we need to separate the differences of. Something that's that big is not just a fort. And you see more examples of exuding walls that represent parts of the river system canal that, in order to deal with flooding. So back to our understanding of flooding of the Nile, flooding of Egypt, flooding of algebra being used to deal with floods. More and more we understand what these walls are really for. Okay. Let me go back again, so you a couple more pictures of Vienna. The architecture also, hyper Ottoman, these crazy gardens. What we know about gardening, Persian, right, for gardening is paradiser, and Persian for empire is paradise, and emperor is paradiser, because the gardener of his empire, someone who's trying to grow his empire into the greatest garden it can be. So gardens, very important to Persian and Ottoman ideas. How important are they to German ideas? Well, they're important. But in Austrian ideas, they're more important. I would say Austrian gardens are more important than German gardens. Someone argue with me. I think that's a fact, that Austrians are more obsessed with gardens. Now, it's hard to say, because Germans do have nice gardens and everything. But if you've been to Austria, like, the gardens they have are just out of control. And I remember being at a water slide park built in the 17th century by an Austrian nobleman who had water fountains everywhere in all of his chairs and all of his tables outside, so that people could play in the water. I mean, the obsession with this runs deeper in places where there were royals. So Austria, very important, beautiful place. I think that covers it for Austria. Keep going a little further ahead. I mean, I could say more about Austria, but I don't think it's relevant today. I just, the fact that the foods and everything, and just how much of the influence of culture really does come from Persia, and maybe also, interestingly, that the culture that was being destroyed by the Persians as well, because at a certain point, they're a holdout during the 1600s when the Ottomans start trying to destroy their own culture. And they're going through this sort of similar Maoist revolution where they're saying we have to scrape the faces of people off walls, etc. And, Austria becomes, in a weird way, a holdout for that culture. Okay, so now we're getting a little further ahead. I think we're going to make it. Turkish Unionists were proud of East Asian origins of the Turkic people and spent much time glorying Turan, which was the name they adopted for the homeland of the Turks in East Asia that was located somewhere north of the Great Wall of China in the Uyghur territory. As the Chinese and Arabs were the traditional enemies of the Turks, there are no ties of friendship to celebrate with these people. Zia Golkop, the chief ideologue of the Young Turks, charged in 1913 essay that the sword of the Turk, and likewise his pen, have exalted the Arabs, the Chinese, and the Persians. The Turks needed to go back to their ancient past, Golkop argued, and it was time for the Turks to once again study the important figures of their own Turco-Mongol tradition, such as Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, Timur, and Hulagu Khan. I saw something kind of interesting about Khan names. We know that Khan and Caesar and the connection with king, but here's one that comes up. Shogun. Shogun used to be spelled with an X originally, and it still is in a lot of the world. Dynastia Shogun, right? But also that sometimes was pronounced Khan. Kogon. Kon. So, yeah, that's Sean. Sean also, I think, is another way. Jean. So, the connections there, beautiful. I love it. I think we'll save on this. This is more when we get into the kind of the issues with the Salafi Prophet movement and, Sharia and how Sharia changed everything. I want to save some of that because I know I'm going to have a Uyghur talk pretty soon, so I'm going to save that. Okay. Zia Golkap, chief ideologist. Turks need to turn back to the Hulagu Khan, be like the shoguns of the past. Now, in 1890s, when the Turkic frigate Ertugrul hit a reef and sank off the coast of Wakayama, Japan, after having an audience with the Meiji Meiji Emperor, the surviving sailors were taken back to Istanbul by 2 Japanese frigates. In the late 19th and early 20th century, a veritable Japanophilia took over a hold of the Ottoman press, with hundreds upon hundreds of articles written dealing with Japan. As an Eastern people who originated in Central Asia, many Turks felt a central affinity for another Eastern Asian nation like Japan, which had modernized without becoming westernized. Further, adding to the mutual attraction between the Turks and the Japanese was their shared enmity towards Russia, the archenemy of the Ottomans for centuries, and the new archenemy of Japan, already starting to promote the ideology of Pan-Asianism. The Japanese started to court the Sublime Porte, with the Meiji Emperor sending princes of the House of Yamato to visit the Sultan Caliph Abdul Hamid II, bearing gifts and proposals for treaties, which generated much excitement in the Ottoman press. Abdul Hamid II, who wrote, while admiring Japan to a certain extent, was obsessed with the fear sparked by popular rumors that the Meiji Emperor would convert to Islam and proclaim himself Caliph, thereby displacing him as an object of veneration from all the world's Sunni Muslims. So this was a literal considered possibility, right? And of course, everyone's converted into Islam. It's so easy to do, you know. They were thinking, yeah, Japan's about to go Muslim, you know, and this has been... There's something else. I did a video. I mentioned this already, but Islamophobia in Japan is an interesting. I'm reading this long thing. I mean, it's only 15 pages at this page, but there's actually it's like 200 or 300 pages long thing. But this area is worth, if you want something. Islamophobia in Japan, 15 pages long. This is enough that you can kind of get the idea of. They were really into each other. They were like dating, and then they were like, hey, you know, at each other. And you're going to wonder, like, what happened? But then there's still connection. But the reason is because each one of them, you know, you kind of just got it there. Each one of them thought the other could be in charge of the relationship, and that they would be merged into something where one came out supreme over the other. And so Japanese culture has been very quick to try to defend its existence, but Japanese culture is also very modern in a sense. It's modern Japanese culture, only 1,000-year-old culture, 200-year-old culture tops, right? So the original Japanese culture, we understand the Ainu let's go back again to the Ainu for just a reminder who the Ainu were. The Ainu are a people of Japan in the Kamchatka Peninsula. There's a number of other kinds of people too. I wanted to make sure oh man, I'm gonna forget their names. Let's see. The indigenous Japanese, Ainu. Oh no, Ainu. Good there. There should be more kinds of people. I just can't remember their name, but there's another group of people too that are there. There's like at least 3 groups of people that are not of Asiatic descent originally, or ascent, I guess is the correct term. They started out European or Turkic looking, you know, and they've expanded to they've been taken and assimilated, but their culture clearly, you know, you can also see their patterns. They're interested in these mosaic geometrical patterns. Not quite a stretch to say that some of that came culturally. And we had talked about this Hayyan period in the 7th century, which is, you know, 7th century Islam is kind of emerging to the 1185. And this is a period where Turks, Persians, everybody essentially who's Ottoman have traveled to Japan, and the interaction between Japan. And we start to pick up on huge connections between Japanese culture at this time. We'll go into that a little bit more later, not today, because it's all going to get really interesting, and I want to just, you know, synchronize it properly. But maybe I'll save it. Okay. The dissolution of the Ottoman Empire in 1908 began with the Young Turks Revolution. Okay, and so this is the thing. By 1930s, the Ottoman Empire is gone, and if it existed for 1,000 years, 600 years, whatever, that's impressive. Who's to say how long anything exists? But the dissolution starts with the Young Turks restored the Constitution of 1876 and brought in multi-party politics, trying to bring forward a Turkic democracy with a 2-stage electoral system for the Ottoman parliament. At the same time, a nascent movement called Ottomanism was promoted in an attempt to maintain the unity of the empire, emphasizing a collective Ottoman nationalism regardless of religion or ethnicity. Within the empire, a new constitution was initially seen positively as an opportunity to modernize state institutions and resolve intercommunal tensions between different ethnic groups. Instead, this period became the story of the twilight struggle of the empire. Despite military reforms, the Ottoman Empire met with disastrous defeat in the Italo-Turkish War, 1911-1912, which is really the beginning of World War I that nobody wants to talk about, and the Balkan Wars in 1912 to 1913, which some people will admit is really the beginning of the war. Let's be real. Before Franz Ferdinand. Anyway, resulting in the Ottomans being driven out of North Africa and nearly out of Europe. Okay, so this is the North Africa, aka Egypt. This is Alexandria, being driven out of Alexandria, which at this point they're using for copper mining and for collection of metals, for iron, smithing, for making, they're making their swords and things. They're relying off of these places to make these weapons, but simultaneously, again, it's 1911, right? So the West wants these places to make more refined things like cars and tanks. And the groups that make the tanks the most are the Italians. So trying to get access to North Africa for the metals, very important. Nearly out of Europe, continuous unrest leading up to World War I results in the March 31st incident, 1912 Ottoman coup d'etat, and the 13th Ottoman coup d'etat, 1913 coup d'etat. So very important, the coup d'etats. This actually is why, I forget if this is the correct when I say this, but I think this is Armenia's coup d'etat or the Ottoman coup d'etat that led to the Xinjiang symbol, right? Because they had to escape after trying to blow up a carriage in front of the house. Anyway, there's a coup d'etat, a number of committee of the CUP, led by Ismail Enver Bey. They support a raid on the Central Ottoman government buildings. It happens again the next year, not too much later. I think this is only like a few months though, and they win. And it's a very important period. I think there's an young Indiana Jones with Ataturk. You got to learn about Ataturk. We're not going to do Ataturk today because he's just too important. I mean, there's just no way. However, you can see here the differences in these faces tell you a lot. One, that there was a lot of diversity in Turkey and in the Ottoman Empire. Two, that they presented proudly that there was a lot of diversity in the Ottoman Empire. That was part of the deal, to say that we are all different colors and maybe even creeds, but not really, because at the end of the day, the creed might be the unifying thing. The creed is that they are Ottomans, not just that they are linguistically Ottoman, not just that they're genetically Ottoman or something like that, but culturally that they are ideologically Ottoman. So that's uniting them. They are the Power Rangers of the Ottoman. Okay. I'll get that across. And yeah, we're gonna definitely have to get into the Balkan Wars. Just too much, guys. Too much to do in a day. Okay, I'm gonna get through this because remember, why did I tell you all this? Right? There's a couple of things I want to tell you about, and you're like wondering what's the deal. One of them was I wanted to tell you guys about Muhammad as the Caesar of Rome and his conscription of Janissaries. I thought that was important. The other thing was Arabian Japan. Now I think I've told you some other things in between there, but it all connects, and we're not quite there because it really comes back to Arabian Turkey. Okay, and this is the puppet state of Japan. Now we know about Fujimura in Peru, right? That Peru was a puppet state of Japan, and if you look around the world, you'll find other examples. And I won't talk about them too strongly because that might offend somebody. But no, legitimately, Japan has interacted. Fujimurismo is the term in Peru referring to when the Fujimura, under the control of the Yakuza and the Japanese triads, took over parts of Japan in the 50s, 40s, after World War II especially, and may have been there even further back. It looks like, we go back thousands of years and they were already there, but they're like, we need to continue to support this source of income, revenue. It's cheaper. We can have land there. I mean, the Japanese buying a cheap place to have a summer home, but it's a state buying a cheap place to have a summer state. So a lot of value to that, and Turkey was one where they were worried because they're an empire, and they're becoming a democracy, and that's what Western liberalization is happening everywhere, and it's destroying the sovereignty of nation states and of empires and of emperors. So Japan's worried, and they're thinking, well, can we do anything about it? Okay, so the Japanese had quite a bold plan to install a deposed Ottoman prince as the new puppet ruler, and he was Abdul Karim. Didn't I have him open already? I do, right? Abdul Karim, man. How do I spell your name, bro? I think, is this right? No, this is wrong. Turkey, Japan. Come on. My keyboard. I swear it's my keyboard. I typed too fast. Abdul Karim. It's got to be in here somewhere, right? No way. Where'd I put it? I know it's here somewhere. It can't have just gone anywhere. Okay, up at the top somewhere. It's going to be like right at the top, huh? Yep, there he is. Okay, back again. Did I get that far? No way. Australization, 1890s, dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, Japanese bold plan. We did it! Okay. So, Sezad Mehmed Abdul Karim was an Ottoman prince, the son of, let me just show you his face, though, because it's really helpful if you can remember Abdul Karim, and it's spelled like Abdul Karim, like it's a big old long thing. And we saw that picture at the top of the page. There looks like there's got to be a movie about it. I'm curious. I'll have to check it out. He had cool glasses. I want those glasses. I don't even need glasses. But that's him in Japan hanging out with his Turkic Japanese troops. So it's kind of interesting that they had this going on. You're like, what is the deal? This guy could have been in charge of the Ottoman Empire in the 20th century. And he was very interesting. And there's a lot of reasons why people thought that would happen, particularly because they were financed by Japan. Okay. So, anything I can do if I can just show a picture of that or something like that? Anything? Whatever. I'll just tell you the story. The Japanese had quite a bold plan to install a disposed Ottoman prince as the new puppet ruler. He was Abdul Karim, the grandson of the former sultan in war in Japan during the rebellion, but would die penniless in a New York hotel under suspicious circumstances. Oh, poor guy. Had things gone differently, he could have been the head of a pan-Turkic state, Eurasia-Turan Empire, you name it, uniting with those rebellions against the Soviet in Central Asia, right? And what's this other thing I got here? Hold on. Check this out. Oh, yeah. On the quest of Prince Abdul Karim Effendi becoming the Emperor of Turkestan with Japan's support. Okay. And so there's this huge, it's not, again, huge. It's only 12 pages, but it's really interesting evidence on how the rule, who was involved. I already kind of explained to you a bit about Greater Asianism and Turanism. The restraint of the royal family by certain groups, and the concern, like we said before, that Japan would become Islam kind of smashed this, ironically. But that's kind of what that's all that happened there, is they eventually said, okay, there's no way we can make this work, even though it seems like there's just so many ways it could work. So, okay, the situation in Xinjiang was a mess, and there were pan-Islamists in China from the Middle East who were slipping into the region from Afghanistan, and there were Christian missionaries, and there were Soviets, and there were German agents, and there, everybody was. There was even proto-Maoist Bolsheviks. Then they all had very different plans for the regions of China into Japan and Korea and East Russia. So China was divided amongst competing warlords, and Xinjiang was initially ruled by Yang Jiangxin. He was an ethnic Han Chinese, but he was pretty decent to the Uyghurs in general. And again, we're talking about Xinjiang because that's a lot of the time what we call the Uyghur territory, which is Turkmenistan, or I think you should call it Turkmenistan, to be fair. Although the map says Xinjiang, so jingle jangle. At the time, two other relevant states in China, the Kuomintang, which ruled the majority of the country, and Guangxu, which was ruled by a Muslim family of warlords known as the Ma family. The Ma family were the rulers of the Shibi Satma San, and just translated, it means the three. So there were like a kingpin of three that were ruling at this time. Look at this guy. I like that. So named after three prominent mad generals that were Muslim, and they were Uyghur, but they were most of the Uyghur were largely Muslim. And so there are some Han Chinese who are also Muslims who formed a considerable chunk of the population in Xinjiang, and they were called Hui today, but most of the time they were called Tongans or something, which is a misnomer because Tungan is not the same as the Tongans from the Tonga. Okay, glad we got that straight. So Yang was replaced by Xinjiang, another Han leader, and he was far more repressive when dealing with the Uyghurs. He invaded a semi-autonomous region of China known as the Kamal Khaganate, a sort of remnant of the old Mongol Khaganate, and the communals appeared to the Ma family in Gansu for aid, and they sent an invasion force into Xinjiang in 1931. And to add further, Add further complication to this, the Ma family were instructed to do so by the Kuomintang, but allegedly had also had some Japanese officers in their army, as well as inside Xinjiang, had some Muslim Japanese who had been interested in the Turkic Revolution and had recruited white Russians as well, who had fled Russia after the Russian Civil War, but despite which also would have included Chechens and Muslims as well. But despite this, he also received support from the Soviet Union. Together, they were able to drive back. I mean, this is really important. I mean, this idea that, you know, when we think of Turkmenistan today and we think of the Uyghurs, we forget that at one point there were a group of people from Japan, not just from Turkey, but from Japan that were there. They were trying to turn it into a new state. Let's look again at the Uyghur territory. Okay, so this is a lot of land right here, okay? This is Mongolia. This is Xinjiang. It's literally almost the same size as Mongolia, okay? So this is a region that was, you know, they're thinking, hey, man, you know, China's not doing anything with this. We can have this. We're going to turn it back into a lot of people living there that don't speak Chinese. I mean, what is China anyway? Back then, it wasn't so clear that China was Buddhist or Muslim or whatever. It's you know, Buddhism comes from somewhere else, comes from India. So what is China, right? China is not its own thing, according to this kind of idea. So Xinjiang, they are their own thing. We should go there and deal with them. And maybe we are more like them than anyone else. And that is the beginning of this revolution with all of these people that were trying to work with the Japanese. Man, I got to see that movie. Who knew that there was a Turkish movie about that? There's got to be a lot of great Turkish TV shows. I hope if there's one thing you learned today, it's that you can watch a Turkish soap opera and you'll enjoy it. Okay, so we're going to keep moving forward a little bit. With the Soviets and the White Russians in Xinjiang desperately previously being enemies, and the Chinese and Japanese fighting with the Ma, despite also being enemies, they continued fighting until the help of the White Russian Jin was ousted and the coup and replaced by Shen Shikai. And this, for those of you who played Hoi 4, is the leader who sometimes plays, or I guess joins the common tune. I don't know what that. So clearly he was aligned to the Soviet, but it is about to get a hell of a lot more complicated as Ma fought Shen. The Uyghurs rose up and formed their own state, East Turkestan. They saw themselves clearly as a distinct group, and both the Han and the Uyghurs were their enemy. The Han and the Wei were the enemy of the Uyghurs. As a Turkic republic, they clearly sought to eventually unite with Turkic people west of them. But if you look at a map, you'll see Xinjiang was a long way from Turkey because you have to deal with Kazakhstan. You know, we saw it a second ago. Like, let me just remind you again. And I don't want to just type properly ever again, I guess. I think I'm broken. Okay, so the Xinjiang, China, Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is here. So to get all the way across, you got to go through a lot of Europe to get, there's a lot of conquered territories before you get out. So that was the end of that. They were stuck, and they were going to have to deal with it. And look at all these great, cool buildings, by the by. Okay. They've been struggling to subdue their own Turkic rebels ever since coming to power. This Asian fight against Soviets, by the way, was called the Basmati movement. Early on in this movement, Enver Pasha, the famous Ottoman military commander, traveled to Central Asia and participated in it. For those of you who don't know, he's one of the leaders of the Young Turk Revolution, perpetuators behind the Armenian genocide, and a leader in the war against the Italians in the Balkan states. By the way, I think the fact that you're talking about Turks so much, just don't think I'm not going to talk about the Armenian genocide. It's not today's video, but that's something really important to remember. We talked about the Janissaries. We're going to have to go a little further and talk a bit. I mean, gruesome stuff. Probably shouldn't even tell you about it right now because this whole video was fine until I did. But yeah, I mean, the amount of people that were wiped out after the Islamatization of Armenian women and children, and men just were murdered, and the Ottomanization period I told you in the 1600s it continued on in the 20th century. So 1600s stopped, I said, kind of in the 19th century. What I meant was it got the hardest it ever got. So something that we should almost do a whole video on, but it's so much. It's so brutal. I don't think that it's the right time. I'm sorry. But it is real. I will stand by that. I don't care what YouTube says. The Armenian genocide is real. And it's important that we acknowledge it. It's a fact. So that's something to deal with. Okay. So a little bit of bummer there for those Balkan states that were dealt with. I mean, there's 3 times over we've had to mention a few things that are seriously horrible that have happened over a 1,000-year period. What do you expect? There's going to be some horrible things. We can't just tell history and leave them out. Okay. During the Qing dynasty, there were numerous rebellions across China. Xinjiang was no exception, and there you had the Dungan Revolt in 1862, and again, this was a mess of different parties getting involved, but under Yaqub begged the rebels to form their own state of Kashgaria, and the Ottoman Empire sent them a great deal of weapons, and even recognized the state's existence, okay? So, we're going to look at that really quickly. Kashgaria. This was Kashgaria. And this was Chinese Turkey, right? And this was going to be right here. And it makes sense because the way the Russians are in Donbass, the way the Turks are in the world, the way the Uyghurs are of Ottoman cultural descent, this made a lot more sense than China controlling it, arguably. And, this is what, if this had happened, they would have been proliferated as opposed to wiped out. I guess that's the best way to put that. I mean, they basically were told they weren't allowed to exist instead. Jordan Prater got a super chat. I'd like to throw it back to a double impact where JCVD plays twins. True 80s classic. Can we talk frog legs, etc. on Google Earth? I don't think I quite got what you meant by that. You might have to elaborate a little bit better. You want to talk about frog legs? Are you talking about like Titan shapes? Or am I missing something? Or are we talking about another show? And also JCVD plays twins. I'm sorry. I'm a little slow today. I'm focusing on Turkey and the Ottomans. I might have missed the point of your thing. I did get the Tachyon video done. So somebody asked for a Tachyon video, and that's going to air tonight. So if you're interested in tachyons and technology, you're going to get a really interesting video with Jeremiah the engineer later this evening. I'm thinking I'm going to air it around midnight or something like that. I might do it a little earlier for everybody, but it's going to be really impressive. I think it's a really great talk. And it was interesting while I was talking to Jeremiah, he had to run because one of the guys working in the anti-gravity lab that he's working with was like attacked, and someone tried to run him over twice. And it was this very like Spielberg horror film. So just so you know, so that everyone knows, and so it becomes such a big deal that they can't just kill everybody working in free energy. You guys saw that thing about the water car police. Let me jump to this really quickly. Hold on. I just saw this water car police. Let me see here. News. Policeman killed was working on water car. Water powered car. Where's it at? Dude. There we go. This has been a big story. I mean, I'm sure I know Tim's got to be talking about it. Everybody's going to be talking about it. Whatever. But it's, this is important that people that are working on free energy are getting killed all the time. Come on. And he's a cop, right? He's not even that bad of a guy. I don't know if that's the way to look at it, but excuse me. Daily Beast. We should get Richie McGinnis on here to talk sometime, my buddy from the Daily Caller, to fight the Daily Beast to death. Okay, hydrogen fuel cell system car. This guy's working a car. He died, and it was just like great. They killed a guy who's trying to free energy for the people. Okay, I think that explains that. So now you guys got to see Kashgar, and you got to see what Kashgar used to look like, and I can even continue going through Kashgar because that explains more of this. All the Uyghur Empire ties into the Japanese Arabia. Even in the 19th century, you could have had an Ottoman ally over in China, but then early 1930s, you'd assume that perhaps Turkey would have supported the Turkic people in these wars, and you'd be wrong, right? It's even more complicated than you'd ever think. The Ottoman Empire had only been dissolved a few decades by hand, but they weren't going to support the Turkic democracy wasn't going to support an Ottoman colony state, right? It's even though they're nationally related, ideologically they're opposed because they were trying to nationalize and modernize Turkey. So to try to create a state for a lost nation, I mean, it didn't work out. It's super bummer, and this is essentially why China controls the Uyghur territories, is because there was a nationalization. And don't get me wrong, like, good job, Ataturk, hooray, don't hurt me, But at the same time, Ataturk is great. They should have tried to protect this Uyghur territory. I don't know. Maybe someone will have a better argument for how, if they spread their forces too thin, they would have lost Turkey. But realistically, what is Turkey like without the Ottoman Empire? So I don't know. I gotta allow you to think about that one on your own. So even though the Ottoman Empire had just been dissolved a decade beforehand, and Ataturk was the new leader of the new republic, but there was still a dispute between the Ottoman loyalists and the Young Turks and the new republic. It was largely these Ottoman loyalists who aided the rebels and some of their leaders like Mushin Kapanolu, who weren't just pan-Turkic, but rather pan-Turanists, right? Not just about the Turkish blood, but about the Turanist ideology. This was an expansion of pan-Turkism, which would unite the Turks and the Koreans, Manchurians, Hungarians, Japanese, and anybody who fell under this vague cultural and linguistic umbrella of Turan. So Ataturk, therefore, was more inclined to support the Chinese to undermine his Turkish opponents, but the rebels did get some limited support from the Afghan king, who sent men and weapons to them. In fact, towards the end of the rebellion, this small Afghan force would fight to the last man while defending the emir of East Turkestan. So the Uyghurs also got some support from the Kyrgyzstani people. And if you're a little confused as to who is fighting for who at this point, don't worry. It actually, that sums up the 20th century. It's really confusing who's fighting for who. And that's what happens in the trenches. People just get confused by World War I. They're just like, what? In World War II, it's just nobody knows who's in charge of anything anymore because they're all conscripted soldiers. If you're a third world country, you're property in the war. So, Battle of Kashgar in 1933. See what a mess it was. The city kept changing hands. Fights broke out in the streets. Often various factions would kill one another or disagree over the real enemies or who they were, or if their uniforms were real or if they'd stolen them. There's even examples of Han Chinese converting to Islam when news of a Muslim army was approaching. The reporters like Ella Mail, a Swiss woman, who was present in the region, offered misreported facts of who was fighting and who was master and queen, and who that being said there were numerous atrocities, that being said, there were numerous atrocities committed on all sides, but no one could say who did what. It was just a free-for-all, insane fight, and people don't even want to remember because it's technically war crimes. So, reports of whole villages being torched, corpses being left to rot for weeks. One of the reports came from George Forsell, a German engineer who was more likely a German agent of the Nazis, and they pointed where, working with the Chinese government, he had been employed to build airplanes and airports, but he would later be arrested in Xinjiang by the Soviets. Otherwise, there were numerous Christian missionaries, some of whom helped him. Our general recovering hospital and Amur general would at one point kidnap a Swedish cartographer named Sven Heder, and one further addition to throw into this chaotic mix is the Tawfiq Bey, Syrian Arab who was in the service of Ibn Saud, the king of Saudi Arabia, but he later joined the Uyghurs in a battle of Kashgar. So even Arabs were involved. Yet most nations refused to recognize East Turkestani Republic. Okay, so just a lot of stuff going on that was just like death everywhere. Maybe we should do a real quick John Birch, a little bit of John Birch. So John Birch is, you've heard of the John Birch Society, but who was John Birch? Because he wasn't even a member, he's just named after this guy. Okay. 1918 and 1945, U.S. Army Air Force Military Intelligence Captain, OSS agent in China, finally fully admitted. I think for some reason they tried to hide that out. Born in India, and raised by Christian missionaries and involved with the OSS, an international U.S. Army character. Born in Presbyterian Lander, a hill station in the Himalayas, North India, he involved himself with missionary work and eventually with China. He did a lot of things. He brought charges of heresy against some professors, such as holding the theory of evolution, because he believed in evolution. He was a modernist Christian, a humanist Christian. Anyway, ended up in Shanghai, which is under Japanese administration. Intensive study of Mandarin Chinese, mastered it. Survived a number of crazy interactions with the Japanese while working for the U.S. and the British intelligence. Wartime working in China, did everything he could to try to defeat the communists in China and the fascists and the dictatorship, and to allow for a democratic world to progress. And then OSS agents in China were ordered to northern China to take surrender of Japanese commanders at their installations. The Chinese communists, who controlled much of the mountainous area, were supposedly allies with the United States, but they were not allowed to accept the surrender. Birch told a friend that they were not to be worried about going into communist-controlled territory, since he had worked with the communists many times and had little trouble with them. And then they murdered him, took over, and it was just this done dirty thing. It's like one of the first times that the U.S. was appropriately responded to by a nation doing exactly the same thing the U.S. does. But then the problem being, of course, the U.S. just cuts their losses, leaves people to die, and gets involved with working with the Chinese eventually, the Mandarin Chinese. At first, they don't recognize them as a country, but by Nixon, that's over. And during Kissinger's time, clearly it was psychologically accepted, whether or not it was internationally accepted. Okay, so John Birch murdered, big thing that went on there. Let's go back a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So we're back to this Effendi guy. This lack of recognition of the Turkestani Republic largely antagonized the large nation of Chinese and the Soviet Union. However, some Japanese sensed an opportunity, and it's important to note that not all Japanese carried out were the same, or these factions worked differently, but there was the pan-Turkish movement in Japan was still, let's see, Turco-Japanese relations. Interesting. No, that's not what we need. But you start to see kind of the example of the artwork and the interaction between Asia and Turkey starts to become even stronger at the beginning of the 20th century. And these were done independently in central government, like invasion of Manchuria, for instance, was initiated by the army alone, not the government, not the emperor in Tokyo. A couple of these groups in particular were advocating for uniting all of Asia under Japanese rule. And some even went as far as to unite the whole non-Caucasian world against the Western powers, the non-Western world. The Black Dragon Society in particular had agents working in the Middle East and Africa. That's something maybe I'm going to save for another time to go deeper into Japan, but the Black Dragon Society is one of the triads. It's a paramilitary gang that goes back to ancient times, and they're a little racy and a little racist, but they're also secret agents, and it's important to the Ethiopian Pacific movement claim they were affiliated with the Black Dragon Society. God only knows. All I know is that there are these groups of ninjas that are still parts of the military order. And we did a good video on the Japanese regalia a little while ago. So if you want to look at that, you can check that out as well. So, in particular, had agents working in the Middle East and even amongst the black population in America. Allegedly, some had links to the Nation of Islam. To some extent, it wasn't even the Japanese, just the Japanese, who believed they had supporters amongst these people living under European rule. And some Turks had admired them ever since the Russian-Japanese War, for instance. Khalid Adib, a famous novelist, named her son Togo after the Japanese admiral who defeated the Russians. So you have nationalists in Turkey who are associating themselves with the Japanese and seeing the Japanese as some sort of they're the enemies of our enemies, so they're our friends or maybe even our brethren. So Japan was seen as a potential liberator for the Turks. Ahira Said Ibrahim traveled to Japan even before the war. World War I, and after the Ottoman Empire collapsed, the number of emigres increased when Japan invaded Manchuria. Some of them began to push for their pan-Tyrannist nation, and they formed the the Idol-Ural society with some Manchurians and various other Asian ethnicities. But again, there were more factions, and some Turks emigres pushed for a pan-Islamic state instead of a pan-Turanist state. Apparently, there was a fight between them at a meeting in 1934 in Japan. Meanwhile, Japan would use both of these groups, and some would be sent around the world as Japanese agents to promote Japanese interests. Then in 1933, the exiled Ottoman prince Abdul Karim arrived in Japan. And I'll go back to his face just to remind you. Man. There we go. So he arrives in Japan, and just again, here he is, arrived in Japan. Okay. Cool. I'll pull that a little bit over there. That should work. Okay. Grandson, the former Sultan Abdul Hamid II, he quickly met with Japanese generals and the Turkish immigrant community, and this is when the plan really kicked into gear. Japanese weapons began finding their way into the arms of Turkic rebels, and the Ottoman prince was ready and waiting to be installed as the new puppet ruler. The Japanese had, after all, already installed a spectacle-formed royal as the puppet ruler, this being the old emperor of China, Puyi, and he was a new ruler of Manchuria. And today we can look at Peru under Fujimura for similar evidence of puppet states and dependent states in a sphere of influence, creating a Japanese polarity in the world stage. In 1933, the Japanese had been making moves in Inner Mongolia and would later create a Mongolian puppet as well. Japan would have a huge buffer state of sorts, several, against the Soviets during their later invasion of China. Although the Japanese naval idea of expanding south into Southeast Asia would eventually become the dominant policy during this time, the Army's desire to strike the Soviets in the north was very much in vogue. So having Xinjiang would allow them to fuel the Basmati rebels in Central Asia, potentially uniting them under the Ottoman prince, and then the move north, they could continue to move north. But it wasn't to be so. The Soviets' ally was on the brink of being defeated by the Chinese Ma family, and he requested aid. The Soviets then invaded Xinjiang and secured it for the Shen. And this was a relatively easy task for the Russians, despite some ambushes made by the Chinese forces in Xinjiang. Still fought with swords, and apparently during the snow. Some would camouflage themselves in sheepskin, but the Soviets were also very aware of the Japanese threat and told Shen, if you let them create an independent state in the south of the province, converting it into a second Manchuria at the back door of the USSR, you'll be in trouble. Japan would not just be side watchers, and they weren't the only ones to notice the similarities with Manchuria. For instance, Ataturk allegedly commented that it would have been a Muslim Manchukuo, and questions about names of Japanese cities like Musashi and Isashi. How high up the plans went in Japan government, it's really hard to know. There was a report done in the 1940s, and many involved denied it. The Soviets were the first to break the news, so maybe they just used it as an excuse to invade power. However, press in the Middle East, like Philistine and Palestine, also reported plans to place an Ottoman prince on the throne. There are also reports of Japanese weapons being there. Extensive maps of the region were being made, and Japan would continue to try and bring Muslims into their empire. So this is the beginning of this expansion of the Muslim state into Japan. So thinks some of these Turks. But most of the Turks, I don't know if most is the right word, but most of the Turks at this point, because it seems like it, because they've won this war, are Turanists. They're not Islamists. They're more secular. And this secularism, because they imagine that Islam has come to Turkey. So they're thinking, hey, well, what is truly uniting us is Turan, not necessarily Islam. And this is the reason why this works, because in Japan, or why it would work, even though it didn't quite go the way we planned, Japan wanted so much to do this before, but they were worried Japan would become Muslim, and they're obsessed with this worry. Japan would continue to try to bring Muslims into their empire, but ultimately, it's hard to get any concrete answers after the Soviet invasion. Some Uyghurs were allowed to enter Shen's government. Mahmud Muhiti, for instance, would later leave and collaborate with the Japanese during the war. So again, showing some possible connections there. Were future wars and rebellions in the region. And there's another thing on the Xinjiang wars that discusses the later wars. The Chinese repression for the population of the Muslims, and particularly Turkic and Uyghurs, that began a lot of what makes World War II make more sense now. That World War II is full of all of this crazy interactions of people that are left over from neo-colonial powers or even proto-colonial powers that have been isolated from each other, and they used to be part of a trade network, and they exist in one city on one side of the ocean and one city on the other side of the ocean, and they continue to trade with each other. So the same, it's a familial network. And you have a dynamic state, a duat. As for Abdul Karim, he was found dead in the Cadillac Hotel in New York. Brutal. Okay. So this guy died in a Cadillac Hotel in New York. I was thinking it was in a Cadillac, but I guess he died in the Cadillac Hotel. Newspapers reported that he had only had $3 in his possession and put it down to suicide. But as you'd expect, questions have been raised, and maybe he was still seen as a potential threat by the Chinese or Soviets, so he was killed. His son, by the way, lives out his life in Syria as the head of the Ottoman royal family and witnessed the Syrian civil war. And he only died last year in January of 2021. As for today's question, the Japanese plans to reunite with the Nation of Islam and set up an Ottoman puppet state. I mean, that's basically what that was all about. So now you kind of know a little bit more about history and a little bit more about Turkish Arabia and Turkish Japan and Arabian Japan and Caesar being a Muslim. There's a lot more to this story. And I wanted to also say Maggot sent me something really interesting I'll probably read tomorrow about it was a Karl Marx dissertation or some sort of essay on the Tartars and the history of the Tartar yoke controlling. I'll mention that it's a long thing, so I'm going to not read it today, but it's going to be worth going into as well. So thank you guys very much. Let me do my due diligence and check out for any sort of super chats before I close down this stream. And Jordan Peter, yeah, somebody explain to me what that all means. Guys, I love you. Show up at the Discord. You know how to get there, exertus.com. I'll remind you again, you go to exertus.com, and you can also go to tartarynova.com if you guys are into that, and you just click on the Discord or Matrix link if you're cool, because the Discord link is easier if you don't have Matrix yet, but once you get Matrix, it's the best thing because it ends censorship and you're free. And yeah, don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, get this video out there, do your Patreon duty, go on and help me out. And then also Andreas.me, you can just push support and you can avoid all of these crazy systems, and you can save the world, guys. You can save the world. Take care.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Oh, wait. Don't forget Jeremiah the Engineer tonight. You guys are going to want to watch that. It's going to be great. And make sure you saw the Divine Maxims of Ptahhotep video I put up, because that's basically the book of Joseph. All right? Yeah, it's important. Just want to make sure you guys, love you.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians. Tarkarian. Recent Tarkarian. Recent Tarkarian.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tarkarians.
Recent Tarkarians. Recent Tarkarian.